Welcome back, Brooklyn Nets fans. The Nets get a pretty much needed win yesterday against the Pacers. I'll go over that game, kind of go over the Miami game, and I don't know how the lighting is right now. I probably look like a ghost. I have the window open, so it's whatever. Who gives a shit? Anyway, so we'll talk about the Miami game real quickly. Just kind of go over why the Nets lost by 13 to Miami, and just look at the matchups and what happened here. 17 offensive rebounds for Miami, 4 for the Nets. Second chance points, 31 for Miami. 4 for the Nets. It's just not sustainable. You can't win that way. I'm sure the turnovers were bad. We only had one more, but still, the turnovers have been a problem offensively. Getting out rebounded has, for the most part, been a problem. And I have this in the graphic, as you guys can see here. The Nets are 3-0 when, and the Nets are 3-0 when they out rebound their opponents. That's pretty much the simplicity of it. I'm not saying that it's going to be the case every time, but like when the Nets out rebound their opponents and limit their second chance points, they have a good chance of winning most of these games. Like, you look at some of the losses they had. Opening night against Milwaukee, they had to get out-rebounded like crazy. I just went over the Miami game. They got out-rebounded like crazy. The Charlotte game, I feel like, wasn't as bad, but they just, kind of broke down at the end there. So, I'm not, totally panicking yet. I'm not. I think 3-3 is not what we want as Nets fans, but it's also not like we're 1-5. So at the same time, one of our best players is still out, and I think he's going to come back at some point later in the year, and we all know who that is. I'm not going to mention that name, but I think he comes back at some point. So anyway, let's talk about last night, Pacers game. Some good stuff happened last night. So James Harden is back. I think he's back. Like, James Harden finally had a game where he looked like vintage James Harden. I will say, let me just clarify the vintage part. I actually woke up this morning. Woke up very late. I woke up at 12. But I woke up at 12, and there was a Rockets and Wizards game from 2019. I think there was a game. It was a game where Harden scored 50-something, 60-something points because he had 42 in the third quarter. Probably was why that game was on. So anyway, just watching Harden in that game, you can tell the explosiveness was different back then. And is it possible that James Harden's still kind of coming back from the hamstring issue and trying to get back to 100%? Yeah, it's possible. And maybe it's possible that we've never seen James Harden, with the explosiveness that he once had back in 2019 and even before that. It's possible. But James Harden, at 90% of that player, is still a phenomenal NBA player. And last night we kind of saw James Harden get back to what he should be. Now, I will say, even for the Nets in general in the first quarter, they look terrible. I mean, I tweeted out in the first quarter, the Nets are a bad basketball team right now. They were turning the ball over at will. Indiana was getting everything they wanted in the paint. They were making a bunch of open shots, and the Nets had no offensive flow. And James Harden himself had 2 straight turnovers in the first quarter, and it was just so frustrating. But then, in the second quarter yesterday, things start to turn around, and they have some of their best offensive flow we've seen all season. We saw some great offensive flow in the fourth quarter to close that game out. So the second quarter of last night's game is where things started to finally look normal for the Nets. And they've had a couple of instances this year where they look like the same old Nets in a good way. But, there's also times where they look terrible. So for James Harden himself, he had 29 points yesterday, 8 rebounds, 8 assists. Field goals were 5 for 11, but the key here is 19 free throw attempts. I think he was fouled on 2 3-point attempts, maybe that was last game. I forget, but I think he had a foul on a 3-point shot. But James Harden was being just noticeably more aggressive, and there was even a play in this game where he was clearly fouled by, what's his name, Chris Duarte or whatever his name is. I'm not good with NBA stuff. I'm a casual with the other teams except for the Nets. Duarte, I think, fouled James Harden, and it wasn't called. So, I mean, there are times where James Harden's still getting fouled, and they're not, the refs are kind of not blowing the whistle. But for the most part, James Harden was getting some calls that he was not getting the first 5 games of the year, and I was surprised, honestly. There was one where I do believe it was a 3-point attempt, and he did that thing where it's a step back and you fake, get the guy in the air and jump into him, and he got a call on that. And I feel like the NBA has gone away from that this year, so I don't know why he got that call all of a sudden. But if James Harden's back to this aggressiveness and can get somewhere around 15 free throws a game, it's going to change everything. James Harden was averaging 3, 4, 5 free throw attempts the first 5 games of the year. If he can get back to this double-digit number, I think we're back. I think James Harden's back. So definitely feels good. And Harden wasn't fantastic. He was really good yesterday, but he didn't have a flawless James Harden game. He still had 29 points. Still waiting for him to get 30, and he had some moments, as I said earlier in that game, where he had some ugly turnovers. And yeah, so there was some sloppy basketball, even with Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant had a lot of turnovers as well. So, there's still stuff the Nets need to kind of work on here. It's definitely not a finished product by any means, but at least yesterday we saw some positives in the second and fourth quarter. For Joe Harris, I hate talking about Joe in a negative way. Love the guy once again, but it has to be said. 9 points, 3 for 9. Had 2 clutch baskets at the end. I actually just tweeted that out. I got to give Joe Harris credit for he had 2 clutch shots in the towards the end of that game. There was like 4 minutes left, and Nets were up 94-90, I think the score was, and they needed a bucket, of course. And Joe Harris, there was a play basically where James Harden gets double teamed on top near half court. He does that bounce pass to, I think it was Bruce Brown. It's either Bruce Brown or Aldridge, or always playing on the foul line. I think it was Bruce Brown. Then Bruce Brown whips it out to Kevin Durant, and then Joe Harris from the corner cuts towards the basket, and Durant fires that one-handed pass, and Joe Harris gets the easy layup. So Joe Harris moving without the basketball, doing a good job of being in the right spot at the right time. And I think Joe Harris, just like the threat of having him out there, is going to keep defenses honest and help the spacing of the floor. Like, if you have a Javon Carter who's been awful in his own right, but if you have a Javon Carter out there, or even a DeAndre Bembry who's not nearly the shooter as Joe Harris, defenses can play more compact and towards the paint. But when you have a Joe Harris, these NBA opponents are like, oh, that guy's a really good shooter for the past 5 years or so. So they got to be more aware of Joe Harris and the floor spacing and all that. So having Joe out there sometimes will help, even when he's not doing anything. But Joe Harris, shooting-wise yesterday, I mean, as I said, he was 3 for 9 from the field and 1 of 6 from 3. He made a nice corner 3 at one point. That's the one 3 I remember. He's now 34% from 3 on the year, which is just, that's not who Joe Harris is. I think, the past couple of years, he's shot like 44% and I think 48% from 3. This is not who Joe Harris is. It should and probably will get better, but right now it's not looking great. And the turnovers, 3 turnovers for Joe Harris is too much. I know 3 is not going to kill you, but for him and the amount of times he has the ball in his hands, which is not that much, I feel like 3 turnovers is not great. And every time, I like aggressive Joe Harris. I like when Joe Harris can go downhill and finish at the rim. But as I said last video, it feels like every time Joe Harris is driving to the basket, it ends in a negative way. It's a missed layup, or, he did get to the line once yesterday. I'll give him credit. But, for the most part, every time he's driving to the basket, it's like a negative outcome. So Joe Harris, I think, had 2 times yesterday that the ball was plucked from him as he was driving to the basket. And it feels like every time Joe Harris puts the ball on the floor, you're waiting for that help defense to just kind of poke the ball out, and it's going the other way. So it's like, I want him to be aggressive, but it's also like every time he is being aggressive, something bad happens is what it feels like. So, he's doing the right thing, but it's always a negative outcome. So it's frustrating. But, I don't know. I mean, the crappy part about Joe Harris is we won't know until the playoffs. I've said that for a long time, even over the offseason. We won't know if Joe Harris is completely fixed until the playoffs next year, because we've seen Joe Harris have tremendous regular seasons as a Brooklyn Net. But when we get to the playoffs and some of the big games and the big moments, that's when he goes away. So we have to wait until April probably to find out. But so far, the regular season has not gone off to a great start for him, and he's not leaving Nets fans confident with him getting much better in the playoffs. But there's a lot of time left. There's still, 76 games, whatever the number is, 75 games. We got time here, and hopefully he figures it out as the year goes on. The lineup that worked. So this lineup the Nets had yesterday, that was James Harden at point guard. The 2 was either Bembry or Joe Harris. It really didn't matter which one it was because it was working anyway. So it was James Harden, somebody. It could have been Patty Mills too. It didn't really matter. So James Harden, somebody, Kevin Durant, of course, Bruce Brown at the 4, and LaMarcus Aldridge at the 5. That was a lineup that was really working for the Nets. And I'm not going to try and overreact to one game. This was a Pacers team that didn't have Malcolm Brogdon. They didn't have Karis LeVert. I actually saw Karis LeVert and Mr. Whammy met up before the game. That was actually pretty, it's always heartwarming when you see Mr. Whammy and former Nets. He sometimes talks to Brook Lopez. Anyway, so, they had some of their better players out. I know Sabonis was still playing. I talked about Duarte and whoever else they had. So, it's not like this was the easiest matchup in the world, but still, you have to kind of put in your head, okay, this is a Pacers squad that's not at 100%. But anyway, the spacing on the floor was tremendous when the Nets had that lineup out that I just talked about. Basically, James Harden was either getting doubled or was, having good defense against him, and he would just pass the ball to the foul line, and then guys would converge, and, the guy in the foul line, whether it was Bruce Brown or LaMarcus Aldridge, would pass it out, and then they would swing it, get an open shot. They were getting a lot of good looks with that lineup on the floor. And as I mentioned, when Joe Harris is out there, you get better floor spacing. DeAndre Bembry, though, gives you a lot on defense. Bembry had an awesome steal yesterday where he came from the corner. He basically telegraphed what was going to happen. He's great at this. I tweeted yesterday that Bembry should have been an NFL cornerback. He could have got a lot more money because his anticipation is awesome. Like, I love Bembry on defense. Doesn't add the most offensively, as we know, but his defense is great. But there was a play, he got a steal, and Patty Mills honestly played pretty well. He had an and one in this game. He made a pretty key three-pointer when the Nets needed it. There was once again, the Nets had a stretch of 2 or 3 possessions in a row where they had a turnover. Then they almost turned it over again, and Kevin Durant came out with it and just threw this beautiful one-handed baseball pass to Patty Mills on the right wing. He made a very much-needed three-pointer for the Nets when they needed it. So, what was I getting to? But yeah, anyway, that lineup I feel like is probably the Nets' best lineup right now because as much as I wanted Blake Griffin to have a great year, he's been playing like crap. And, I feel like LaMarcus Aldridge is probably the best option right now. Nick Claxton has been out with the illness, I believe. But it's not like Nick Claxton has played well either. And the sad part is LaMarcus Aldridge is now 36, I believe. So he can't play 30 minutes a night. So you kind of got to pick your spots. But I feel like LaMarcus Aldridge to close out games, that's the way to go. And Aldridge actually kind of played well against Joel Embiid. He kind of played well against Sabonis. If he can play well against these centers that oftentimes kill us, he'll definitely be a valuable piece of this team. So, I was in a dark place as a Nets fan because I'm thinking, as we're getting out-rebounded by the Heat, I'm like, man, we should have signed Andre Drummond or Dwight Howard. And if I have those thoughts, it's probably not good because those are guys that are fine, but you should not be craving a guy like Dwight Howard or Andre Drummond. You know what I mean? So, as long as we out-rebound people or don't get killed on the boards, I like the Nets' chances of winning most games, but the second chance points and all that has killed them this year and has been a result for at least 2 of their losses so far. So anyway, LaMarcus Aldridge, just talked about him. He was great. I mean, I think he joined the 20,000 point club yesterday. It's actually funny. I saw Matt Brooks tweeted this, who covers the Nets. So basically, someone asked James Harden, and we know James Harden's history with the clubs and whatnot, and being at the strip clubs when he was with the Rockets. And James Harden's a big club guy, is what it sounds like. Anyway, so someone asked him hey, how do you feel about LaMarcus Aldridge being in that 20,000 club with you and Kevin Durant? And James Harden was like, "What club? What are you talking about?" And he didn't know what he meant because basically what the reporter was asking was, how do you feel about LaMarcus Aldridge being in a 20,000 point club? And then, of course, James Harden's mind went to an actual club. So that was kind of funny. But anyway, LaMarcus has been great. Now for Blake Griffin, Javon Carter, I mean, I had high hopes for Javon Carter. I did. I went back and watched some of his games with Phoenix, and I'm like, this is a guy that could work. As long as his offensive game is decent, he'll work out here. But the problem is his offensive game is literally non-existent. He's doing nothing offensively. And the weirdest part about Javon Carter, if you watched this entire game yesterday versus the Pacers, you'll know what I'm talking about. There was a play where I think Joe Harris got it on the wing, or maybe Kevin Durant got it on the wing, and Javon Carter was in the corner, and he kicks it to Javon Carter, and he's wide open and passes the ball back out. So you're like, okay, maybe Javon Carter understands he's not supposed to shoot three-pointers anymore because he has not been good at it. But then, a few minutes later in the same game, he has a play where he dribbles to the corner and does a step-back three and bricks it. And I'm like, well, why'd you not take the first one, then you take that terrible attempt? It didn't make sense to me. So the whole Javon Carter thing is still pretty confusing right now. I'm hoping he figures it out because I do like his defensive intensity, but there was even a time yesterday where, what's his name, TJ McConnell had a spin move in the paint on him, and he got an and one on Javon Carter, and that should not be happening. So I know McConnell's a crafty player, but if Javon Carter was that good on defense, I feel like that should not be happening. So have not been too impressed with Carter. Blake Griffin has been just not that good. I mean, I do like Blake Griffin's energy, of course, taking charges. He was diving on the floor yesterday. Him and Joe Harris hit each other yesterday, almost gave each other concussions on that play. That was very ugly. So luckily, both were okay. But it feels like every time Blake Griffin has shot a three-pointer this year, it has not gone in. I want to look at the percentages because Blake Griffin, there's no way he has made more than 2 3-pointers this year. So he's averaging three-point attempts per game, so that's not nothing. He has to start making these shots at some point, and he's shooting 6% from 3. Blake Griffin is shooting 6% from 3. He probably made 1 all year, honestly, so it's very ugly. So he's got to get better, of course, and it's not like Blake Griffin's the best shooter, but if he can just hover around 30% from 3, I can live with that. But 6%, no, we can't have that. So got to get better. And once again, the Nets are 3-0 when they're out rebounding their opponents. So sometimes, once again, it's that easy. So that's what they got to do. So I want to look at the upcoming games here because I know there's a couple more home games coming up here on this 6-game homestand. Then they go on the road for like 7 straight games. It's a weird schedule. Like they're really just like, I don't know. It's kind of extra. Anyway, they're home against the Pistons tomorrow. I don't think the Pistons are that good. Once again, I'm a casual, so I don't know, but I don't think the Pistons are that good. Then they play Atlanta. Of course, they were tough last year in the playoffs. So, a couple games coming up that they could win for sure. They play the Pistons on the road 3 games from now. Then they play the Raptors on the road, which I feel like we never win in Toronto. So that kind of concerns me. So anyway, yeah, the next like 3 or 4 games are very much winnable, and we'll find out what happens here. I'll have an update reaction type video after those games conclude. Hopefully everyone enjoyed this video, and I will talk to you guys next time.